Morena koutou councillors, Greater Wellington staff. Just a reminder, now that the light is red, we are on the live stream, so get your beautiful faces out and, be camera ready. I'm going to open with our karakia and then we'll kick into the meeting. So please join me if you want to. Do we have it? No, we don't. Okay, you're dealing with me. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E he ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Right, we'll begin with our apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Bassett, Councillor Gaylor, who our thoughts are with today, and Councillor Connolly. Can I please have a mover and a seconder? Councillor Ropata moves and Councillor Duffy seconds. All in favour? Aye. Joyous. And also welcoming our councillors online, Councillor Staples, Councillor Wolfe and Councillor Laban. Lovely to see your faces there on the big screen. All right. Do we have any conflict of interest declarations? No. Okay. And no public participation today. So first item is to confirm the public minutes of the Climate Committee meeting on the 28th of March. Councillor Kirkpanan to move and Councillor Nash to second. All in favour? Joyous. All right. And now we're into our very substantive agenda for the day, short and sweet, but important. Welcome, Suze Keith, on the Climate Emergency 10-point action plan refresh. And Jake, you might as well just park up for the morning because it's the Jake show. We're in your hands.
Kia ora koutou, nice to see you this morning. I'll take the paper as read, but essentially the decision to be made today is to consider the refreshed 10-point action plans and endorse the changes to those plans that were considered through the LTP process, and then recommend that the council adopts these plans.
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Duffy.
Morena koutou katoa. Kia ora, thank you for the paper. It's always good to get these updates on action plans because in the end it's about the actions, not the plan. That's wonderful. A couple of questions. One relates to 4E, the review of our 2015 climate change strategy. So I had a brief look at it and quite right, the overarching objectives remain relevant. Quite a lot of the detail in it, though, is rather dated, being 10 years old. Climate projections, sea level rise projections. There's a lot of numerical detail in there. Is there any benefit in refreshing it to bring it up to the latest science and policy directions, or is it not really necessary because the objectives are simply the most important thing and they're still the same?
Through you, Madam Chair. Essentially, the latter part of what you said, Councillor Duffy. So we could go through a process of preparing a new document, but really all of the things that would be in that document we already have. So yeah, it would. I'm not sure what it would achieve to update it. Like, for example, we're talking about our action plans right here. We've got them. We're updating them. They're 2 pages long. It's quite easy to manage. Whereas a document which is much longer and has all of the science in it, which does need updating from time to time, we'll be spending a lot of time on that admin. So I really just came to the conclusion of letting it lie and saying, well, there's nothing. The principles of that strategy haven't changed. The detail you can find elsewhere if you want it within GW's resources. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not the one to want to update things just for the sake of updating them, so I appreciate that pragmatic approach. Second question, Chair, in relation to paragraph 15 and the move to be able to include PHEVs in our light vehicle fleet, is there consideration there of Euro 6 type standards, because we're going to have diesels in the fleet for longer. And while it's not a climate outcome, the air pollution standards of diesel vehicles are quite significant. The difference between the grades are significant. Is that part of the consideration with which type of PHEVs we buy?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would have to go back to the fleet manager and check if that was part of the purchasing criteria. In New Zealand, we now have emission standards, but still only just for CO2. And if we follow Euro, it's just by accident, essentially, because that's what is available. But I would have to find out if we have a specific policy around that.
Could I just add to that, Madam Chair? Sorry, if you don't mind.
Yes.
We can get more detail on that, but it is, for instance, where we are innovating constantly with the fleet is around, for example, we just got our first EV utes, and so Toyota Hilux equivalents, so they now produce a electric version of those. So we're moving into investing in electric utes, and part of the diesel conversation you were just bringing up there, Councillor, was a lot of our residual diesel fleet was in the utes, so we are starting to transition away from diesel when and how we can, and it's still quite new technology, but we've got a couple that we're trialling now, and should they be successful and provide the functionality around cost efficiency, that's where we'll start to head in terms of getting rid of the majority of the rest of the diesel fleet, which is largely in utes.
Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the material. All looks good from my perspective. I had a couple of questions on table 2, the action plan, the regional climate emergency action plan, and these may be questions that are sort of more sub actions for taking down and coming back to probably with advice from Environment Group, but I just thought might as well raise them here. One is action 2, which is looking at the relationship between pest control and forest ecosystems storing carbon. We've talked about this a fair bit, and we've talked about whether there are ways of excluding ungulates from certain areas, like on our regional parks, and then looking at how that increases the capacity to sequester carbon as forests can recover faster, better, or at all. And I just wanted to put down on the table, I'd love to see an update on that at some point at a workshop, or just for council at some point. And I mean, one obvious area would be East Harbour Regional Park, which does have a problem with ungulates, goats in particular, and could possibly be defended. And then the second point is point 3, just below that. I just wonder the science and understanding around the capacity of coastal marine environments as they are restored to sequester carbon. That's been evolving, and there was recently some media coverage on that this week, I think. And I just wonder where we are on that front, understanding the relationship in our region between restoring coastal marine environments and sequestering carbon, and how we could support that from a regional perspective. Obviously, wouldn't affect our organisational carbon footprint, but it could be a way of us supporting wider sequestration of emissions in the region. So I'd love to get an update on that at some point as well. Thanks.
So, hang on, we've got a speaking order, so we'll keep to that first, Councillor Duthie. Councillor Kirk-Bernand.
Thank you, Jake. With item 16, where we're talking, where we're working with stakeholders in that, how do you see our monitoring and working with Centreport and the work that they're doing there? Where do you see that fitting into following up on it? And that, as a largely owned subsidiary of ours, we've got a strong interest in making sure we monitor their performance. So can you comment on that, please?
Through you, Madam Chair. For our part, we talk often with Centreport. We have a regular catch-up with staff involved in managing their energy and carbon plans to find out how they're going and to compare notes. For example, they've installed quite a large solar PV array on Shed 39. So they've provided information about what that cost per kilowatt and what the maintenance costs are, and that's actually helpful information to us with building our own, for example. Also, they're acutely interested in what we're doing with the Energy Transformation Initiative. Essentially, that's the direction they want to go, even if we weren't doing it ourselves at GW Corporate. So we've been comparing notes on that too. So yeah, there's regular communication, and then of course the regular greenhouse gas inventory. They're providing verified information to us that we can, forms part of our inventory. So I'm aware of all of those links. Beyond that, I would have to talk to my colleagues about how they're, how often they meet with Centreport. Yeah.
Councillor Lee.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Jake Sues, thank you. I know in the action plan we talk about collaboration, and in a perfect world, everyone works very well together. But are there any outliers, or probably not outliers, but probably more resistant players, whether they're agencies or TAs? Are there any resistant entities which we need to work on who probably don't, who we might find somewhat troublesome?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Lee, you speaking to Action 9?
Yes,
on
Action
the
9.
regional plan?
Yes.
No, I think there's more, there is a desire to be acting on climate change in the adaptation space, but there's reticence and concern around how to go about that, especially when there's a lack of central government guidance as to the rules in this space, like roles, responsibilities, and who pays. And that's what we spoke to in our submission to the climate adaptation inquiry recently. So it's not that institutions are being adverse to acting on adapting to climate change. It's more a fear of litigation, you know, those sorts of things, and not really having the confidence to be able to understand our roles and responsibilities. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to achieve through the regional approach to adaptation planning under the leadership committee, is to really get that regional agreement as to what's the best way to go about this.
And also across the TAs, are we getting a lot of support in terms of action?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think it varies between the TAs. I'd need to speak to my colleagues in the environmental policy space, because I understand a lot of discussions are going on through the implementation of the regional policy statement in terms of how natural hazards are being recognised through the district planning process, and I think the responses to that is variable.
Thank you.
Right, going over online to the mighty Wairarapa, Councillor Staples.
Kia ora, good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question goes back to the EV utes on the back of our Chief Executive's comments, and I would like to know where I can find the assurance that when we move to an all EV fleet, that it will actually meet our requirements for when it comes to emergencies and also productivity. And I want assurance too that we're not just shifting our emissions onto somebody else, given that we are not, as a country, 100% on renewable electricity yet. So, you know, my biggest concern is around having utes that will do the job for us in an emergency when perhaps charging stations aren't handy, aren't operating, etc. And the paper did say that we would be keeping a proportion of utes until we had that assurance, but on the back of the CE's comments, it sounded like we're moving to EV utes as quickly as possible. And what about the budget? They are way more expensive.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to clarify, the utes that are being trialled are hybrids, so not plug-in hybrids, they are regular hybrids, and it may be, well, it's a trial, essentially. There's two of them out of 130. The council operates 130 utes at the moment out of a light fleet of 180. So in terms of going to disaster resilience. The target is that there would be mostly electrical plug-in hybrid utes. I'll clarify that some are plug-in hybrid, so those can be pure. They can run on petrol or diesel in an emergency, so we'll have that resilience. There are no 100% electric utes available yet. What is coming on the market, if you went to field days, you would have seen the BYD Shark, which is a plug-in hybrid ute. It has 100 kilometres, depending on what it's towing, on its battery. So we might see some of those come into the fleet, but it would always be assessed on those hard operational requirements that we have. Ask Nigel if he wants to expound on that more. Yeah.
No, thanks for the question, Councillor, and thanks for the response, Jake. Look, I mean, it is a trial, and we will have to review all the things you talked about, Councillor Staples, in terms of the cost effectiveness, the functionality, and is it an expandable kind of network of utes more broadly. So I think the questions you asked will have to be answered, and we can bring that back to a climate committee or another committee in the future. But I think if one reason we've taken a while to transition even trialling some of the electric/hybrids is because they just haven't fitted the functional needs of the organisation and the staff tasks. So we'll have to review the two that we've got and see what they look like and see whether they can be expanded. But I think I was trying to give an indication there as a direction of travel that we're taking that is a little bit different when the technology has changed to allow us to do it.
Okay, thank you.
We're about to enter our second round of questions, but I guess the ute issue creates more talk. I'll just put my question in here. Just noting, Councillor Nash, you raised the table 2, the Climate Emergency Action Plan, and some of the discussion here. I was just wondering whether any of our organisational delivery and these points will be incorporated into our the FRAC committee's deep dive on climate risk that's coming up in November, and if there would be an opportunity to feed into that, Jake.
Of course. We work closely with staff who are doing our risk dashboards and contribute regularly to risk insurance activities. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that November slot might be a good time to look at that, as well as some of the external. I think it'll be focusing on externalities rather than some of our responses in that delivery and whether we're tracking on that. So it would be good to incorporate that into that. Our first paper is generating a lot of discussion. We're coming back to Councillor Duthie for a second bite at the cherry.
Always hungry. I think it's my only other question. It relates to Table 1 and line item 7. So it's great to see that we've completed the options assessment work on reducing and sequestering emissions on flood protection land. Mm-hmm. Wondering if that could be circulated to councillors and be interested to see what those recommendations and different options are. Is that possible?
Through you, Madam Chair. At the moment, the work is being socialised internally, all through the levels of staff, and including in the near future to ELT. And I'll leave it to ELT to comment on what happens after that. Yeah.
I think I can add to that. Yes, we're just socialising it internally, and then I think we would bring it to a council workshop, probably an environment committee workshop, or would be the suitable place to discuss the options.
I always feel left out when there's socialising going on that we're not being part of, so can't miss a good social.
Councillor Kirkman-Ann, you had another question.
Thank you. Jake, my question is a general one about how we work with secondary emissions that we have. What I'm thinking about is the contractors that work for us in that. Mm-hmm. And why I ask is I was talking to Taupo Council last week, and they were saying that when they have contractors working their trucks, their machinery, and that generally they insist on machinery that's less than 10 years old because it's much more efficient over emission issues than older machinery. So can you comment on that, please? And I'm thinking particularly the likes of Riverlink, because they've good example for us.
Through you, Madam Chair. Supply. We include our diesel emissions already from heavy machinery, and a specific requirement about age of machinery. Well, I'm not personally aware if we're doing that or not. Sounds like a good idea to me. And we are increasing our focus on supplier emissions. So, as a requirement of the local government funding agency climate action loans, there's a requirement for us to basically look harder at our contractor emissions in terms of can we include them in our inventory, and of course, if we're going to include them in our inventory, how are we going to manage them? So, I'll take that suggestion on board. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're at the point where we can make a decision on the Climate Emergency 10-point Action Plan refresh, and we are making a decision on endorsing the changes to the organisational and regional climate emergency plans, and recommend that the Council adopt the organisational and regional climate emergency action plans. May I please have a mover? Councillor Nash, and seconded by Councillor Ponta. Do you wish to speak to... No? Okay. All in favour? Aye. Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Suze. Thank you, Jake. Jake, you may stay in place as we move to the review of organisational emissions reduction targets, which was the workshop item you brought to us last week or the week before that we had quite a substantive discussion on. Take it away.
Melanie's contributed to this paper, Councillor Saul, so she's joining at the table for any technical questions around emissions modelling. So this paper concerns the review of our organisational emissions targets. The purpose is to outline why the review of our targets is necessary, the factors surrounding that, and broad sets of options of how we could modify them or not, or add to them, in fact. The recommendation is that we that we develop proposals to bring back to Climate Committee and eventually Council for both gross emission organisational targets covering all categories of emissions. At the moment we do have gross emissions targets, but only for categories 1 and 2. And also that we develop a proposal to modify our existing net emissions targets, essentially to change them, likely move them back from where they are at the moment, but not move them any further back than net zero by 2050, because for one reason at least, that is a condition of our climate action loans. I'll mostly take the paper as read. All of this content was covered in the workshop last week. One thing that wasn't in that workshop was financial analysis of the opportunity costs. So this is table 1. So essentially, it can be thought of 2 ways. So if you inset, that is, we keep to our existing net targets, then we will forgo potential income. So the opportunity cost is outlined in that table under various assumed carbon prices in the future. Opinions vary on that, but under current settings, it seems like we'll be looking at more like $50 than 100 or 150 in the 2030s if nothing has changed about the emissions trading scheme. So essentially, that table can be thought of 2 ways. It's the opportunity cost of keeping to our existing targets. It also is the potential revenue from selling those emissions units. So you can see it's in the order of 10 to 20 million. The table's a little bit unusual because the low effort scenario seems to be less costly, and that is because there are fewer emissions units. Because it assumes natural regeneration, that means you have less emissions units, or rather you get them much later, and so therefore you can't sell them. So that's why that one is lower than the other 2. I think I'll just go to questions.
Any questions, councillors? Okay. Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Councillor Duthie.
Okay, thank you. In scenario 1, low effort, the parks regeneration assumption is a natural regeneration only, which is a bit unrealistic because we've already planted and we've budgeted for planting more, so we're not likely to end up in that situation. So when you come back with the proposed targets, do we need to get a bit more of a refined analysis there of more of a mix of planting and natural regeneration that is we're capable of doing, rather than that false scenario of only natural regeneration, which is unlikely to be what happens? Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, it is perhaps we chose that one as a bit on the extreme side, but it does show at least one end of the spectrum. So yeah, it's kind of why we put it there. The reality, as you say, would be perhaps if we used more natural regeneration, it would be somewhere between the low effort and the medium effort scenarios. But absolutely, as part of refining these targets and coming back with a proposal, we would absolutely look long and hard at that side of things, and work closely with the environment group to confirm the approach to restoration.
Councillor Nash.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for this. Just one question about the climate positive term. I mean, I think I agree that we obviously we agree, we workshop this, and I think we've got some good discussion on it. So it makes sense to remove that 2035 climate positive target. But that doesn't mean we can't still have an ambition to be climate positive as an organisation, right? We still want to get to a point where the emissions, our corporate emissions that we produce, are less than the emissions that we are removing through forests and wetlands and so on. Well, I guess forests in the context of the ETS. We still want to get to that point, right? We're just saying we're not going to be able to get to it by 2035. Is that right?
Through you, Madam Chair, absolutely. So the term climate positive is one that we use to essentially mean net negative emissions. And that, yes, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about net zero, it's not actually possible to nail net zero because, or what if someone left the heater on? Whoops, you can't control your emissions to that level of precision. So essentially, yes, would absolutely, when we say the drop dead limit for a net target is net zero by 2050, essentially that would be net negative or climate positive, as we've been referring to it. Yeah.
So that's good. So that's important. And the other point I had was just around paragraph 11. So the features common to all those scenarios, low effort, medium effort, high effort, does talk about public transport buses, fully electric. I hope we can still do that, but obviously this was prepared before we got the results from the National Land Transport Fund, which declined to fund all of the newly proposed public transport improvement bids. We don't know, we're just working out obviously what that means for our public transport budgets and plans. But I guess I'm just a word of caution that some of these things may be affected.
Through you, Chair, absolutely noted. So again, that's why we're not coming back right now saying this is the target we think you should adopt today. It's because we really need to look again at that side of things. Yeah, and if there are any new developments, we will absolutely do our best to incorporate them, and Melanie will help me plug them into the spreadsheet, and we'll see what the consequences are.
And just if I could say one more little tiny thing, just when we're talking about electric buses and emissions reduction, I think it's worth noting while we're in the climate committee that it is more important to have buses than electric buses, because, and as it might seem, little odd to say that in a climate committee, but even a diesel bus will reduce emissions more than it not being there if people are driving petrol cars instead. So that's something for us to just weigh up in terms of how much importance we put on, spending more to replace an existing bus with an electric bus rather than getting a growth bus that is going to add new capacity and frequency and get people out of cars. The bus is more important than a new diesel bus is more important than replacing an existing bus with an electric bus.
Any other questions? No, if not, may I have a mover and a seconder to adopt these new organisational emissions reduction targets? Councillor Ropata moving and Councillor Duthie seconding. Would you like to speak to the motion? All right. Wow. So we are now at. Pardon me? We're about to. I'm just reading them out. Thanks, DEM Services. So we're now voting on agreeing that the officers develop proposals for new targets for all categories of Greater Wellington's gross organisational emissions, which is option B. And we agree that officers develop a proposal to remove Council's existing net emissions targets for 2025, 2030 carbon neutral and 2035 climate positive, and replace them with a new net emissions target no less stringent than net zero by 2050 for all Greater Wellington's organisational emissions. All in favour? Please say aye. Right, carried. Thank you. Next item, Jake. Just for information, no decisions are ensues. We are now looking at the Climate Emergency Response Programme update. A few juicy items here to update us on. Take it away.
Kia ora koutou again. Yes, so this is a high-level look at what we've been working on since we last spoke to you, in particular providing an update on the submissions that we've made since we last met, and the regional approach to adaptation planning that is underway, the status of the organisational climate related risk assessment, and the status of the Low Carbon Acceleration Fund. And I will take the paper as read. And any questions?
Any questions? No. I just had a question around some of the reporting around the ETS and the state of the market and some of the volatility around that. Could you speak to that?
Of course, Councillor Saw. So I attended a conference online on Monday and Tuesday, Climate Change and Business Conference, and one of the presentations was on the emissions trading scheme, and Christina Hood from Compass Climate, known for many years, took over her job at Kapiti Coast District Council in 2010, put up a graph of the emissions price in the ETS for the last 5 years. And it's a very jagged line. It goes up and up and up, and then it peaks and it drops and it comes back and it jumps all over the place. And then she pressed a button and put all the government announcements about the ETS onto the graph and explained every single bump and jump, essentially. So the last bump and jump was it dropped down when the government suggested that they might lower the auction floor price in the ETS. It dropped down about $10. And then when the climate change minister said that he was actually going to follow the Climate Change Commission's advice after all about unit supply and these auctions that the government runs, it popped back up. So now it's sitting at around about $62 a tonne. And the outlook really is, the mood music is essentially that the government seems to want to allow an awful lot of forestry to happen in New Zealand and to enter the ETS, and that we will see a rise in prices because there's a lot of harvesting going on, so there'll be quite a lot of demand for units for people to, for foresters to be able to cut down their forests. But then once all these new forests start growing, that the price will basically level out at about $50 a tonne in the early 2030s. So that's the outlook. But of course, the government could change its mind. It could restrict pine forestry, for example, and that might have some other effect. So basically, your guess is as good as mine as to what's going to happen in the future, but it depends very, very strongly on what the government says and does. So the $62 a tonne at the moment in relation to LCAF, that means that we are close but not quite under our self-imposed 70% allocation limit. We've said that we won't allocate more than 70% of the value of our unsold units, and we haven't sold a single one as yet. And if you count up all of the allocations we've made so far, that's last time I checked was at about 74%. So if the price goes up another, $5, then the LCAF is back in business. So yes, could expound on the ETS all day, but if there's any more specifics, I'm happy to try and answer them.
No further questions, councillors? All right. Oh, yes, Councillor Lee.
Are NZUs traded as futures? Is there a futures market? Not that I'm suggesting that we should, because I think that's a little bit iffy if we're trading futures.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, I believe there is a futures market for ETS units. Certainly a futures price is advertised, where we go to look at the daily spot price, which I've been referring to at the moment. There's also futures prices updated daily. So I would assume that they're putting those prices out there because there is a market for futures, but I confess I know very little about it other than that.
Thank you.
Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. In relation to paragraph 29 about the Recloaking Papatoa Nuclear Restoration Program, there's mention there of a process of staff working through removing grazing from Belmont using a structured decision-making process. Now, I've had some correspondence with staff about this, so I've got a bit of an understanding of what that is, but I thought for other councillors it might be useful to hear a bit about what that process is and when the outcome of that process comes to councillors for discussion.
I'll let Dave answer this one.
Through the chair, we'll have to come back to you with exactly what the structured approach looks like, Quentin, but it will involve our broader catchment. Oh, we've got someone here. Sorry.
Kia ora, I'm Janet Lawson. I'm the team leader for Environment Project, so I'm overseeing that structured decision-making process along with other staff. So we have some workshops next week, and so what we're doing is under Toiti Te Whenua, it's very much agreed that grazing will end at Belmont Regional Park, and the current grazing licence ends in January 2026. So that will end, I think, about 1,200 hectares of grazed land there, and it's been raised that that's maybe a little concerning for staff that all of a sudden we'll have that much land to bring into our management, and there are huge risks around, let's say, pest plant growth and pest animal growth, and if it gets covered in gorse, we're going to have fire in that space. So how do we maintain access for those while we're suddenly dealing with all this space? So what we're doing is we're looking at structured decision-making process to look at all these different elements and considerations to come up with a plan for how we best go about removing grazing, minimising those risks that we've identified. So we don't have the options on the table. The workshops that we have next week are going to devise those options. We've got a number of experts coming to those. And once we have those options, we'll be bringing them to council for a decision and approval to go ahead. And we anticipate at this stage that we're likely to look at staging grazing and using grazing as a land management tool and gradually staging it back. But we're not really certain what that looks like yet. But if we do go down the line of some continued grazing, there'll be a restricted activity process that we'll have to go through. So that will include full consultation, and that again will come to council for a decision. So once we've got those workshops underway and we've got some options that we prefer, then we'll be bringing that back to the table for discussion, but probably through the Environment Committee is my guess. But yeah, come to us as well.
Councillor Duffy?
Are our mana whenua partners part of that structured decision-making process to devise and refine those options?
They are. We were hoping to have done these workshops a few months ago, but we've actually spent a lot of time trying to bring our mana whenua partners on board because they're really crucial to that. So we've got both Taranaki Whānui and Ngāti Toa in the room next week, and we'll be following up with them as we go forward. Yeah.
Any further questions, councillors? No? All right. Thank you so much for that update. That brings us to the close of the meeting. Thank you so much for all the hard work, climate team, and for the great questions, particularly regarding heavy vehicles, councillors. A lot of interest in utes. Just to give Jake a break, because he'll be back here at 10:30 for our workshop item on the extra emissions units. We can break for play lunch, morning tea next door. And if you're joining us online, we'll be back in the room at 10:30. And now I will, oh yes, Quentin, and oh yes, Councillor Duffy.
Sorry, at the moment the workshop's scheduled for 11:30. Just for people online, do we want to clarify? Are we bringing that forward to?
I just said that. So, I just literally said we'll be back in. Yeah. So, yeah.
Can I just clarify, Madam Chair, we stay on this link?
No, it'll be a new link, Councillor Staples.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ponta?
I just want to acknowledge your very breezy chairmanship style and the introduction of the word juicy into the debate. So congratulations.
Thought you would have liked talk better. Cool. Thank you, Councillor Ponta. All right, well, I will, here's our closing karakia and we'll head off to morning tea. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapanui, kia wātia, kia mama, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua I te ara takata. Koia rā e rongo, whakairea ake ki runga, kia tina, tina. Huie, tae kie.